Take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks a lot. It's great to be back here again for another AIM webinar, this time with our friends from Iron Mountain. As you mentioned, Nina, digital, paper to digital, the digital transformation journey. This is part one of discussion, more on part two in a moment. But first, digital transformation, we talk a lot about it, but think about this. At the core, it's really about getting rid of paper. It's the transition from paper to digital and getting rid of manual processes and antiquated ways of working that were great in the past. Indeed, ways of working that have been the legacy of how business has been conducted for years, but are now perhaps an encumbrance to superior and competitive performance in the 21st century. But despite the push towards digitization, many organizations continue to rely on paper and legacy ways of working in key areas of the business, often supercritical activities that impact directly the performance of the organization. And if you're attending today, it's likely that your organization does too. Most folks find that addressing legacy paper records and these legacy processes are the most challenging parts of their digital transformation journey. Indeed, according to our research here at AIM, member organizations consistently tell us that one of their top information management challenges is overcoming this paper challenge and their biggest barrier to making the transition to a modern digital first organization. And if that's your experience too, and you're looking for ways to get your arms around all of that, then I think you're in the right place today. So where do we start? I think it all starts with knowing what you have to begin with, right? What information can and should and must be digitized and what should not. Then devising well-thought, business-connected, potent strategies for the disposition of that information and how the information is actually used. Not only how the organization can and should protect that information and remain compliant, things like that, but perhaps more importantly today, how we can more effectively leverage information in ways that really matter, in ways that really move the needle in terms of organizational performance, competitive advantage, things like customer experience and profitability. That's a different order and a tall order, but today one that is required if organizations aim to remain competitive. So the next critical question for us today is, how do we do it? Well, that's what we'll be exploring today with our guest experts, Nicola Bagwell and Andrew Kern from Iron Mountain. They have a 5-phase digital transformation model that is designed to help us on our digital transformation journey. And in this webinar, we'll be focusing on the first 3 elements of that model. In August, we'll be back here again to focus on the final 2 elements of the model. So you'll want to sign up for that session in August as well. But today, I'll be asking Nicola and Andrew to describe the model overall and how it works. We'll dig into the first 3 elements in depth, and we'll look at some best practices that we can use. And we'll see a demo of some of the tactics in action. All right, and we want to hear from you too, so please don't be shy about raising your specific questions and providing your comments. We've reserved some time later in the webinar today for Q&A. So please post your questions and your comments along the way, either in the Q&A feature or in the chat, and Nina and I will work to get those into the discussion. And so with all of that said, I'd like to introduce our guest today, Nicola Bagwell, Director of Go-to-Market and Customer Success at Iron Mountain. Nicola has led many different teams in her near 20-year tenure at Iron Mountain. Most currently, she's focused on solutions that utilize things like artificial intelligence, along with information governance and workflow in a cloud-based environment. Joining us as well is Andrew Kern, Regional Project Manager at Iron Mountain. Andrew also has over 20 years experience in the records and information management industry and was the recipient of Iron Mountain's North American Innovation Award. So Nicola and Andrew, welcome to the event today. Thank you for joining us. Iron Mountain, as I mentioned, has a 5-phase model for digital transformation that's designed to help us step through the best practices and get towards success with digital transformation. Briefly, the steps are identify, scan, store, automate, and unlock. And we'll be focusing primarily on the first 3 elements of the model today. But Nicola, can you give us a brief overview of the 5-phase model and how it works?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So
I'd be happy to. The, really, the model starts with how we identify content, and that's the largest tranche. Content in so many different formats through an organization, and that physical content isn't just paper. It could be microfilm, microfiche, etc. It could be so many different lab books, it could be anything that takes physical content. So it's really getting to grips with what that content is and what needs to be digitized go forward. So understanding the value of that content at that early phase. Then you'd move into, once you've done that, move into digitize, trying to go paper free. So not just digitizing that older content, but also looking at how you can bring in more electronic content as well into your platforms. And then for that platform piece, the store, it's all about having access to that digitized information. It's great if you digitize it, but you want to have the right access. You want to make use of the information you've digitized and utilize that in the way that really supports your organization or your line of business, your aims and goals going forwards. And not just for day-to-day transactional activity. You want to be thinking about how you can use that content in other ways to support the business. Could be business strategies, informing other teams or organize other parts of the organization or your customers go forward. And then from that digitization, it's also looking at how you automate. So a lot of organizations go through steps 1, 2, 3, and then struggle into automate, because it's the big piece. What else do we need to do? How do we refine? How do we save more cost in the business? How do we make our processes faster and more relevant and allow us to be more for our organizations and for our customers? And then once you've done that piece, it's the unlocking. It's all of the content. There are various stats out there from different places around how much content we actually use, that we have. But what we want to try and do is unlock that content, make it valuable again. If you've gone to the cost of identifying, digitizing, storing it, and using workflows and automation, you want to make sure you are monetizing that content. And so that means you have to be able to identify the content that's valuable to you, to be able to, and how you want to use it going forwards.
Well, as you mentioned, we can often get stuck on one or two or a couple of parts of that model, a couple of parts and pieces, and not really look at it as a whole. Nicola, why is having a model like this so important?
It's really about making the most of your investment in digital transformation and getting what you need out of that investment. It, you know, digitization and going through all of these processes, of course, costs money, and you want to make sure that you're getting what you need from that investment. It's really what will help you move forwards in the best way, looking at what are the challenges that your organization has in different, it could be different departments, different teams, or competitive advantage. How can that data help you? So it's all, that's what you're trying to get to from this. In terms of eliminating paper, it's getting access to the content, it's driving it forward, making sure that you're using it in the right way, and as I said, ultimately getting a great return on investment for actually going through this process in the first place. There's no point in doing this and then just bringing in more content or the same content in a different way. So
Now, Andrew, let's dig in a little bit. Let's start with the identity phase and talk a little bit more in depth about it. It's really the getting at the question of what are you doing with your legacy records on paper. Can you tell us more about what's entailed in the identify phase of the model?
Yeah, I mean, it can really be an overwhelming process to begin with, and the whole concept here with our best advice is to think about how you approach step one. So many organizations have struggled with similar problems with how they store legacy paper records, the type of visibility that they have to those records, their ability to make decisions in a simple and fast way. Really, they struggled with having a cost-effective solution to really get through step one, which ultimately means most of them haven't really taken a lot of action on their legacy paper. And this step is really all about taking control. Nicola talked a little bit about taking control and knowing what you have. Um, when you struggle with visibility and you struggle with decision making and you struggle with being able to accelerate processes because of all of these problems, you really end up getting stuck. And many organizations may transition over to step two without kind of bypassing step one. And there's something that really makes this very difficult in many organizations to get through step one, and that's managing event dates. In most cases, retention is determined based on event dates. And depending upon whatever industry you're in, there's different types of event dates that determine retention requirements. Maybe there's regulations also that determine that, but event dates become very difficult to manage because they often change. And how organizations associate the event date, such as a close date of a loan or a close date of a claim or a policy, how they associate those event dates to the physical records is a very difficult thing to do when you struggle with visibility. So identify is really all about figuring out what you have, being able to make defensible decisions on what you have, so that you can start destroying and getting rid of the legacy records that you should no longer keep, creating better value of the records that you should keep, and then also setting yourself up for long-term decision making. And there's another piece of it that ultimately makes this challenging. All of this really kind of just rolls up together with rot too, and how the impact that rot has on an organization.
Well, that's interesting. Andrew, analysts tell us that up to 80% of corporate information is rot or redundant, obsolete, or trivial. That's a shocking statistic, depending on who you listen to and where you find that information. Have you found that 80% to be true in your experience? And what are the implications of rot? And what are the advantages of getting rid of it?
Oh yeah, we definitely find that to be true. A lot of negative implications of rot, as I'm sure most people can relate to, but it creates what I'll just call a sea of challenge. It makes it difficult to know what you have. It creates more volume that you have to try to figure out how to navigate. Creates a lot of confusion and complexity with what I should keep and trying to find the things that I actually need for business value. Creates a lot of inefficiencies in processes, inefficiencies in decision making, and it really has an impact on risk. Because rot, when you keep this stuff longer than you're supposed to, there's a lot of risk that comes with that in a number of different ways. But being able to get rid of that rot has a lot of positive impacts too, which decrease complexity, simplify the process of making decisions, creating a more cost-effective, program for yourself, and reducing a lot of risk associated to that. So we do see that, Kevin.
All right, Nicola, let's move on to the next phase, which is digitize. Does it make sense to digitize everything? And when should we not digitize? And once I do digitize my content, my paper records, where and how should I store them most effectively?
So to the first point, Kevin, it's absolutely, thinking about digitization, it's what's valuable. As I said, you really want to get the return on that investment. So you don't want to be digitizing content that is not relevant. So you want to be thinking about, how do you classify your content, as Andrew was talking about there. Is it a business critical content, for example? If it is, that's a great way to think about, well, that's valuable for me to digitize. If something happens, I need access to this content, so we absolutely should digitize this. And then you can look at the content in different ways. It's not when you classify it, it's not just how business critical it is, it's at what part of the life cycle of that document are you in terms of retention. You wouldn't want to be digitizing something that's only got 6 months retention left, for example, or a year retention. You want to take you want to take a really good look at all of these pieces and really understand how you want to classify that content, and then what do you want to do with the content. There's always some content within an organization that has a single use, and once that single use has passed, you're never going to look at that content again. So again, why would you want to digitize that? You know, it depends on how you're using the content. Does it have go forward value? Is it something that's going to be useful in the future? Can you derive monetization efforts from it, for example? Could you look at it in a different way? So when we look at how are we doing that and that value against the physical piece as well, it's all around the value of everything that you have physical. You expect when you do digitization, so the amount of physical is going to reduce. As I mentioned, retention. As that retention expires as well, you're going to reduce down your physical content, and you should be increasing your digital content. So where you're getting the value, where you're being able to access that data, whether that's through a distributed workforce, whether that's in different workflows, whether you're utilizing that data to bring more value to the organization. So it's really around when you're storing it, your storage between physical and digital is going to, one's going to drop, the other's going to increase. And as you implement more digital first policies as part of digital transformation, again, it's going to have the same impact. And as you build up that digital content, you're obviously working through, you've got the retention schedules again as well, and you get to the stage where your digital content starts to even off and continues to increase. Of course it does, because there's so much content out there that we bring in. But if you continue to apply the rules of value for that content and not keeping content, so the rules that you applied in sorting physical, you can apply to your digital go forward, so that you're not keeping content that you don't need going forwards for any particular reason. Because the last thing you want to do is replace hundreds of thousands or millions of pieces of paper with millions of billions of, you know.
Uh-oh, did we lose Nicola? Andrew, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm still here, Kevin. Yeah.
I worry that Nicola may have frozen somehow. She looks like she may have. Oh, there she is. Hello,
Can you
Nicola. Are
hear
you
me?
with us?
I am. I'm sorry. Where did I drop? I do
Oh,
apologize.
well, you know, I thought it was just me. No, you were telling us about the value, how our storage will go up in digital and go down in paper. And we're really looking at the value of that information. But you know what struck me, Nicola and Andrew, both as you were talking there, and I will get back on track here in a moment, but the thing that keeps coming up for me is really understanding, as Andrew put it, these event dates and the retention requirements. Nicola, you're talking about it. We wouldn't make much sense to save a bunch of stuff that we really don't need to retain for very long, or that we don't understand what, you know, that life cycle needs to be. Is that the biggest consideration, Nicola, in when I'm entering into a large scanning and storing of legacy paper operation?
I think it's certainly a large consideration. So, you know, compliance is one of the top drivers for transformation as well, in terms of having data, making sure that the retention schedules are in place, and you're keeping data that needs to be kept and retained. But it's also about bringing the value from that content in how you're using it. How can you use that content to drive more value for the organization? Where could you extract additional content, for example, in that information that can support downstream processes and make those easier as well? So there's a number of things to look at, and that you can identify in that initial stage, that from digitization into store, that will really help you make that data accessible. So when we think about that data, and making it accessible, it's all around getting the data in at the right point of entry, incorporating, as I said, through daily, you know, how you get that into the customer activity. How do you make that better? Or the employee activity, how do you make their lives better? Being able to access content rapidly, and from with a distributed workforce, you know, and remote access as well. So there's lots of areas to consider when you're digitizing and with what you're digitizing.
Well, Nicola, you're getting into an area that I love to talk about, is how we use information to improve the performance of the organization. And certainly one way that has been prominent in our minds as a result of the global pandemic is the intensified need to enable remote work. And you're talking about accessibility of information.
Mhm.
That's all about providing more flexible sharing of information. What strategies provide the most advantage now to organizations that make the move to this model of information management to support remote work and other activities? What are the advantages what are the strategies that provide us the most advantage there?
It's really thinking about, whether, as this slide said, thinking about where the challenges are in the existing process, to employees being able to do their work effectively remotely. Pandemic brought about a great change, whether it was like a digital mailroom change, because, no people were no longer in offices, so you had to get that content to workers to allow decisions to continue, to allow businesses to continue to run. And as we have that remote work strategy and hybrid strategy, and travel is restarting as well, it's all about getting that making sure that content and prolonging that effort that was made during the pandemic and increasing on it, so that you can get the most out of your employees in a sense that is good for the employee as well. There's been a lot of change, and people have recognized, a work-life balance in a different way. You want to be able to take advantage of that. The employee market is very variable right now, people moving still everywhere. So using digitization and using this kind of strategy to get the information on a remote basis, and making it easy for employees for wherever they are, whether they're working from a coffee shop, whether they're at home, whatever it is they're doing, to be able to work in the timeframes that they want to. By digitizing the right way, getting the right information, you're making sure you're getting faster results at the end of the day. You're getting more accurate data. You're getting data to those employees that is valuable, saving time, allowing them to do the things that are important to them within their role, and also within the organization. And that doesn't have to be done from an office. That can be done from anywhere if you have the right digitization process and the right platform from which to operate on with those employees.
Our guests today are Nicola Bagwell, Director of Go-to-Market and Customer Success at Iron Mountain, and Andrew Kern, Regional Project Manager at Iron Mountain. We're talking about From Paper to Digital, the digital transformation journey. Part 1, part 2 will come up in August, so sign up for that as well. And we're here talking about a 5-phase digital transformation model to help us in our digital transformation efforts. Now, Nicola, I know you have a quick demo to provide for us today about, can you give us an idea of how things work and how we can do it too?
Absolutely. So just before we jump into the demo, this gives you a bit of a flow around what happens when you're digitizing data. There's some flows, and you want to make sure that you're stepping through, that you've got the physical document is managed appropriately, and it can come in from any different kind of location, and that you've got auditability across that physical document before it goes into digitization, because you ideally want that across the entire process. You're keeping that. And in terms of then working through the digitization process, there's a lot of activities, still manual activities around, for example, document preparation, scanning, checking quality assurance, indexing, sort of taking key metadata at that stage if you're not doing it at a later stage through an automated process. And once you've got those digital documents out, it's all about driving those through into the platform that's going to be used, making sure that you've got certain things like role-based access control, so that data is only viewable and accessible to employees that should have access to it. That's really critical, especially if you're talking about personal information, personally identifiable information. You want to have a great search capability, because you want your employees to find that data quickly. You don't want to replace issues of looking through physical paper with issues of taking time to look through digital content. You want it to be a much more rapid experience for the employee, and anybody else that's using that platform. And you want to know that you can access it when it's needed. and that the digitization is good quality. So yeah, I'm happy to move on to a demo if you are.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. So when I log in here, there are different ways of logging in, and on this particular one, I would click on the Google link because I'm going through my single sign-on. And this brings me into our dashboard. And this is really giving admin users and other users a view into the content that's within the environment. So looking at the different types of documents that may be held within the platform, stats of those. You can also look at any tasks that are available for that user, if there's any workflow activity they need to do, and different views. So it's important to be able to get the metrics as well with a platform. You want to be able to see those. It's not just about going and finding content, but it's also about understanding how you're using that content from within the platform as well. So you can continue to make the right decisions about the content that exists within the platform and how you're using it. So if I want to go to a search, to open a search, I'll just click on the magnifying glass over here on the left that I've kept highlighted, and that will open up a search for me. And I've got different ways of searching within this environment. I can use OCR data, I can use metadata. But what I'm going to do is take advantage of my saved searches here, because I may be looking for the same types of content all the time. Lots of workflows do that. And I can get results quickly that I look at more often. So from here, I'm going to select claims relating to John Doe. So I've got all of these different claims that are relating to John Doe, and we've got 43 results here. John's very active in the claims. He's keeping us busy with all of his claims. And so what I want to do then is narrow that, because I don't want to be looking through 43 claims. Nobody wants to be doing that. That's just as bad as looking through 43 files for John Doe at the end of the day. So we want to narrow that search. So if I add the name, I'm going to add the name in the referencing doctor of Jane Smith. And that's now narrowed my search down. You can see straight away to 9 files. So Jane's been involved with John on 9 of those cases. Now, at this point, I may not have any more data to actually search on. So I've got 9 files, and I could now start to look through each of those documents to locate the file that I want. So as I do that and I bring up the file, I can see my claim, I can see the metadata, the other metadata on the right hand side. I can see other information in the file, and I could at this point potentially go back to my search and start to add more content to refine the search further. But at this stage, I can then just look through those files if I still don't have any additional data, and continue to look. And it's all about being very, very quick with the search results and helping search through content that you need to get to where you want to be rapidly, especially if you have very limited data on what you're looking for. And you can see this straight away, we went from the 43 down to 9, and we could very quickly get through those files. So just a quick view of kind of how you can use this type of environment and search rapidly to get to data that you need.
Nice, nice. Now, Andrew, can you give us an example of one organization or one use case that has been successful using this approach? What did they do? What were the results, and how can we do it too?
Yeah, I mean, it has one example of an organization that had 8,000 cubic feet of records, of legacy records that they knew added value digitally, but they struggled to get through this identify step to know what they needed to keep and what they should destroy. So being able to leverage this thought process of take advantage of step 1, figure out what you have, what you need to keep, make the right decisions on the disposition, and then go forward, transitioning to what even Nicola's talked about with the day forward data first approach, where they would image all records that they would need on a go forward basis. This has traditionally been something that most organizations have had to figure out how to navigate on their own, and it's been very difficult. But we're seeing more and more and more of these specific use cases where customers are strategically and specifically going after that 5-step approach so that they can ultimately make a smooth transition.
Our guests today are Andrew Kern, Regional Project Manager at Iron Mountain, and Nicola Bagwell, Director of Go-to-Market and Customer Success at Iron Mountain. We're about ready to go to our question and answer section of today's event. So I do encourage you folks that are with us today to go ahead and post your questions and comments either in the Q&A feature or the chat feature, and we'll work to get them into the discussion today. Let's take advantage of having our two guest experts here to help us with our specific questions or our barriers or let's hear about your successes as well. But Nicola and Andrew, where does Iron Mountain help with all of this? Do you have some resources or next steps that you'd like to share, some recommendations for where we go next?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I think as we talk through specifically step one, the whole idea here is, it sounds simple. Figure out what you need, make the right decisions, get rid of the stuff that you shouldn't keep. It is an overwhelming process. And one of the main reasons why so many just have not been able to successfully complete that step. Iron Mountain does have solutions specifically designed for step one. And that solution that we have is called Smart Sort. You can find more information on that through these links. But Nicola, if you'd like to maybe talk a little bit about your solutions.
Sure. So I think one of the things to bear in mind, I mean, we've got lots of content. There's the so part 2 of this coming soon, and there's a lot of other content that we've got out there that you can look at through the Iron Mountain web pages. There's a lot of digitization effort and automated content service platform kind of content that we can share. But I think one of the things that's really important to think about when you're doing this is really understand what you're looking to get out of a platform. It's what are you looking to get out of the digitization process? Developing a strategy and understand what you have. Don't necessarily do it yourself. Understand what needs to be changed, but articulate the benefits you're looking to achieve. A lot of digitization projects fall over because the organization looking to digitize hasn't articulated clearly the benefits there, or they don't know what they're expecting to, what good looks like at the end. And so it's often a kind of, well, this wasn't what we were expecting, and it's really knowing. So before you move into digitization, it's what is it that you're looking to achieve from this? What areas of the business are you looking to improve? And we can help with that in terms of discovery process, doing workshops, making sure that you're looking in the right places, you're asking the right questions, involving the right stakeholders. It's critical, a lot of organizations will now keep a very narrow stakeholder view when they're looking at digitization, but it's important to get as many inputs as possible across an organization where it could impact, because as it starts to grow, you really want to make sure you're hitting all of those stakeholder points so you can really see the value and that return on the investment.
All right, very good. Well, Nicola and Andrew, we do have some questions coming in from our attendees today. First, starting with Henry Hernandez, who's asking, what's the best cost benefit analysis for companies storing records internally? In old school filing cabinets, what about companies wanting to scan records but continue to store? Fear of destruction, he says. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, depending upon what your objectives are and what's a priority or what you're willing to do or not do, I would really recommend that you look to not take that workload on yourself. And it is extremely overwhelming and can be pretty risky. So, I mean, I would look for some type of strategic partner that can help you accelerate that process and simplify it for you to help protect you from the risk and cost of trying to do that on your own.
Very good. Okay, we have many questions coming in. Fa Fan, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that. Fa Fan, what or how do you assure the original physical documents are intact after scanning, especially those that are binded as a book?
Okay, so I'll take this one. There's lots of different ways of if I take the last part of that question first, for example, a bound book, there's different ways of digitizing those. You can disbind the book, you can remove the spine if it doesn't, if you're able to remove the integrity of that and it's not a valuable book. If it's a valuable book and you want to keep that as a book and you don't want to damage it, there's book scanners that are out there where you lay pages, they automatically turn pages. It can be a very rapid process. So in terms of looking after the integrity of documents, that's all part of that discovery phase, because we work with a lot of different organizations, archivists, national archive centers, and they want their data to be kept in exactly the format that it is. They do not want books disbound. They don't want documents taken apart or cut or in any way, shape or form damaged. So a lot of sensitive practices, but generally, scanning nowadays, digitization, there are lots of different types of scanners out there. There's lots of different processors, even down to wearing white gloves to protect content, that very precious content that may be of historical process. So I think a good scanning organization and process will be able to talk about all of those different processes knowledgeably, show how content is managed and show how it's protected through the scanning process.
Very good. Next question comes from Gregory Leroy. How many retention years remaining does it make more sense to digitize rather than store, related to cost?
So I would say, that's really down to an organization and that retention date and the type of data that it applies to and how often that data is used. So I think it's not just a single factor, as I said, that really moves into what's valuable to digitize and to make that cutoff. If you've got data that is, has got a lot of retention time left, but is never going to be used. It's maybe, as I said, it could be something that needs to be kept, but you're not actually going to use it. And at this point in time, you don't see a value for it. Then you would put that into a certain bucket and you would focus on multiple factors to decide on the valuableness of that, the prioritization of your scanning. You really want to be doing it for many factors rather than a single. If retention is critical, I know I mentioned, if you've got like 6 months left, then, that's kind of like generally as a rule of thumb, if you've got anything less than sort of 18 months to a year and it's not used that often, you wouldn't want to spend the time digitizing. But if you've got something that's got a year left, but it's highly active, you would want to digitize it so that you are getting the most out of that, because even that year's use and the speed of being able to access that data in a different way can bring a lot of value rather than accessing that paper file or whatever, multiple times in multiple teams. Maybe multiple teams need that data all at the same time, which you can't do with a physical file unless you're going to make more copies and add more paper, which we definitely don't want to be doing. So yeah, there's lots of different factors that kind of pull into this.
All right. Time for just a couple more questions here today for Nicola and Andrew. If we don't get to your question, please go ahead and still pose it in the chat or Q&A. We'll be sure to pass them along and you can connect directly with your questions. But before we run out of time, Greg Cornwell asks, what if the contents of a folder are imaged, but the physical is not destroyed for whatever reason, then without IG or records knowledge, doesn't that compromise the image? What do you recommend? Ask the requester of the physical record ahead of time to inform IG if they need to add something. What are your thoughts on Greg's comment?
So I think if I've understood that correctly, it's around if you don't have a retention schedule and you want to image something, can you destroy the physical after it's been imaged, in a sense? Could you know what to do? So there's lots of different processes out there around, for example, legal admissibility and evidential weight of original data. And often that is a determining factor for destruction of the physical versus keeping the physical after imaging. If that physical content content would be required for any purpose, such as auditing. A lot of financial data has to be kept. The physical invoice, for example, has to be shown for auditing purposes rather than the electronic data. Or if you're going, if potentially that physical document could be used in any form of litigation, courts will often want to see the physical data if it still exists. If it doesn't, then they're generally happy to take the electronic data because that's the copy you have. But there's a series of practices, good scanning practices, digitization practices that can be followed to show that the image is the copy of the physical. And there are practices in different parts of the world. There's different processes and best guide practices that you can follow, or standards that will help show that the content that you've digitized, the resulting image, is the exact copy or an authentic copy of the original. And that can help you get around that process as well. So you could then destroy if you needed to.
All right. Well, we have a ton of questions still coming in. Look, we may not get to everyone's questions here today, but please sign up for the follow-up part 2 of this discussion in August and join us then. Nicola and Andrew, if you don't mind, how about a quick lightning round, just to see if we can't get a couple of these quick questions in. Can you recommend a mail scanning solution? What would you recommend as the best and fastest indexing software with respect to cost? And what are the minimum indexing requirements? And then we'll just have to leave some of these questions for a follow-up or next time.
Let me see if I can rapidly answer some of those.
Yes.
So we had, would you recommend a mailroom scanning solution? Iron Mountain does have a mailroom scanning solution. There's lots of them out there. What you're really looking for is one that allows you to get data accurately and rapidly to the intended recipient, has a good exception management process that can, so that data that doesn't get there is managed accordingly and doesn't impact process. That will allow you to take cost out and those kinds of things. There's a lot of benefits, but it's really about getting the right information to the intended user at the right time, with auditability and traceability of that content. What else did we have? Do you recommend, is it the best and latest? I'm just trying to find some of these that you reeled off there. Was there another one?
Well, we'll certainly have an opportunity to revisit some of these questions, and continue our discussion in August. I'd like to turn it back over to Nina now to tell us a little bit more about part 2 of this discussion. Nina, tell us more.
Apologize for that. So yes, part 2 is coming up August 11th. We are giving the AIIM audience an opportunity to register early. So mark your calendars, everyone. The Digital Transformation Journey Part 2 is coming on August 11th. We'll be discussing best practices to store content and automate processes, how to identify critical data and processes for transformation, and much more. So AIIM is giving the audience an opportunity to register early. So secure your seats today. Also, we still have our 2022 Industry Watch report that was just released. This is a free download available to our audience. And we ask that if you are interested in the combined independent research, data trends, and actionable takeaways, please visit aim.org/2022-research to download the report today. A direct link is also going to be put into the chat, so feel free to download that. I also want to give a big thank you to the underwriters of today's event, Iron Mountain. We have also recorded this webinar, so you can catch anything you want to hear again in a recap email that will be sent within 24 hours. A link to the resources for this webinar was put in the chat. You'll find a copy of this presentation as well as additional resources through that link. And don't forget to take our feedback survey and let us know how we did. So as we're coming to a close, I would like to ask Andrew and Nicola if they have any takeaways for our audience at this time, Andrew?
Yeah, I think that probably the most important thing that I could say is recognize the difficulty associated to getting through this process and know that there's people that can help you, encourage you to not try to take it on yourself.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree with that. It's really all about asking yourself the right questions and getting somebody in to help you ask those questions so that you're not missing something that you will need for the future. We talk about digitizing data that's valuable. You don't want to miss anything that's valuable too. So it's really help understanding and getting those that data into the right format to get the most out of it.
Okay, great. And Kevin, what about you? What are your takeaways from this webinar?
Well, listen, as I mentioned when we started, overcoming this paper challenge and the legacy process challenge, I like to call it, is essential today. It's essential for organizations to remain competitive today. And it's not just about how we protect information and remain compliant, but it's also perhaps more importantly about the way that we use information to encourage better organizational performance and competitive advantage and customer experience, things like that. And Iron Mountain has this 5-phase digital transformation model that is a fantastic framework to guide our efforts throughout that journey. And I'm looking forward to talking more in August about the final parts of that model and putting it all together in ways that really make a difference. So looking forward to it then.
That's great. A big thank you to our underwriter, Iron Mountain. Without support from our solution providers, we wouldn't be able to bring you free educational programs like our webinar. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. This is Nina from AIIM. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.